15 years of marriage vanished in a single Facebook post. My husband convinced our entire town I was a manipulative monster who broke his heart. I lost my friends, my reputation, and my home. I thought I had nothing left to lose until his estranged brother showed up with a box of secrets from 2011. Nobody warns you about how quickly a life can be rewritten. You think your history is carved in stone, but in the hands of a charismatic liar, it is nothing more than wet clay. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was sitting in a sterile, overpriced hotel room on the outskirts of Seattle, having been locked out of my own home earlier that afternoon. My husband, Delani, had changed the locks while I was at a dental appointment. When I called him, frantic and confused, standing on the porch of the house we had meticulously renovated together, he didn't answer. Instead, I received a text message. "I can't do this anymore. My lawyer will contact you. Please don't make a scene." I thought he was having a nervous breakdown. I thought it was a misunderstanding. But then my phone began to vibrate violently. Notifications flooded my screen, a relentless barrage of texts, missed calls, and social media alerts. My best friend of 10 years, Brenda, was the first to text. "Caitlyn, I am sick to my stomach. How could you do this to him after everything he sacrificed for you? Don't ever contact me again." Trembling, I opened Facebook. There it was, a sprawling 800-word manifesto written by Delani, posted publicly, and tagged with a dozen of our closest friends and family members. He painted a masterpiece of betrayal, starring me as the villain. He claimed I had been carrying on a years-long affair with a former coworker named Greg, a man I had spoken to exactly 3 times at corporate retreats. He claimed I had been secretly siphoning money from our joint savings account to fund a gambling addiction. He described, with heart-wrenching, fabricated detail, how he had tried to get me psychiatric help, how he had spent nights crying on the bathroom floor praying for our marriage, and how my toxic narcissism had finally broken his spirit. It was a total, unadulterated fiction, yet it was crafted with such precise emotional manipulation that even reading it, a part of my brain felt disoriented, as if I were reading about a stranger who shared my name. The comments were a bloodbath. People I had hosted for Thanksgiving, women I had comforted through their own miscarriages, men who had drank beer on our patio, they all lined up to crucify me. "Delani, you are an angel for putting up with her this long. I always knew there was something off about Caitlyn. Praying for your healing, brother. She doesn't deserve you." I tried to defend myself. I typed out frantic, desperate replies, begging people to listen to me, swearing that Delani was lying. But my comments were either deleted by Delani or met with swift, vicious mockery. Gaslighter, they called me. Liar. Over the next 3 months, the smear campaign escalated from the digital world into my physical reality. Delani was a prominent architect in our community. He sat on the city planning board, sponsored Little League teams, and charmed everyone he met with his easy smile and faux humble demeanor. I was an accountant, quiet, introverted, and utterly unequipped for a public relations war. He froze our joint accounts, claiming to a judge that I was a flight risk who would drain the assets. My lawyer, a tired woman who seemed to half believe Delani's narrative herself, told me to settle. "He's got the whole town on his side, Caitlyn. You're not going to win a character trial here," she sighed, shuffling papers on her mahogany desk. I was entirely isolated. My mother had passed away years ago, and my father died under tragic circumstances back in 2011. I had no siblings. Delani had been my entire world, my family, my safety net. And now he was systematically erasing me. I was forced to rent a dreary, mold-smelling studio apartment in a bad part of Tacoma just to keep a roof over my head. I lost weight. My hair started falling out in clumps. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how the man who had once kissed my forehead and promised to protect me from the world had become its primary threat. Why was he doing this? We had been unhappy, yes. The marriage had grown cold, suffocated by his need for control and my growing resentment. I had asked for a separation a month prior, suggesting we seek counseling. I had wanted a quiet, amicable split, but Delani didn't do quiet. For Delani, a narrative where he wasn't the heroic victim was unacceptable. If I left him, it would damage his perfect reputation. So, he had to destroy mine first. He had to make sure that if I walked away, I was walking away in disgrace, leaving him draped in the sympathy of everyone we knew. To understand the sheer cruelty of Delani's betrayal, you have to understand how we began. You have to understand 2011. In the spring of 2011, my life was anchored in a small, independent hardware store called Hayes Hardware. My father, Arthur Hayes, had built it from the ground up. I was 24, fresh out of business school, and managing the store's finances. We were a local staple, beloved by the neighborhood, but we were struggling. Big box retailers were closing in, and my dad had taken out a massive second mortgage to expand our inventory, a gamble that was teetering on the edge of failure. Delani was a regular customer back then. He was 28, an up-and-coming architect working for a prestigious firm downtown. He would come in buying supplies for side projects, always lingering at the counter to talk to me. He was charming, attentive, and fiercely intelligent. He made me feel seen in a way I never had been before. Then, in November 2011, the catastrophe struck. It was a bitterly cold Tuesday night. I was woken up at 3 a.m. by a phone call from the police. Hayes Hardware was on fire. By the time my father and I arrived at the scene, the building was a towering inferno, the flames licking the black sky, consuming decades of my father's sweat and tears. The aftermath was a nightmare. The fire marshal ruled it an electrical fire, citing outdated wiring in the back storage room, but the insurance company fought the claim tooth and nail, tying us up in bureaucratic hell. The financial devastation was absolute. The bank called in the loans. My father, already battling high blood pressure, suffered a massive heart attack 2 weeks before Christmas. He died in the ICU, holding my hand, his final words, an apology for leaving me with nothing. I was orphaned, bankrupt, and drowning in grief. Enter Delani Scott. Delani swooped into my shattered life like a knight in shining armor. He took over the funeral arrangements, paying for everything out of his own pocket. He hired a shark of a lawyer to deal with the insurance company, eventually securing a payout that cleared my father's debts, though it left nothing extra. He held me while I sobbed, fed me when I forgot to eat, and told me, with a fiery intensity in his eyes, that he would never let anything bad happen to me again. "You're safe now, Caitlyn," he would whisper into my hair as we lay in his upscale apartment. "I've got you. I'll always take care of you." 6 months later, we were married. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I believed that out of the ashes of my greatest tragedy, I had found my soulmate. But over the years, the golden cage Delani built for me began to shrink. His protectiveness morphed into possessiveness. He didn't like me working long hours, so he convinced me to quit my firm and take a part-time remote job. He slowly alienated me from the few friends I had before I met him, pointing out their flaws until I stopped calling them. He managed all our finances, giving me an allowance for household expenses. Whenever I pushed back, he would bring up 2011. "After everything I did for you, Caitlyn? After I pulled you out of the gutter when you had nothing?" he would say, his voice thick with a calculated hurt that always made me feel instantly guilty. I spent a decade twisting myself into knots to be the perfect, grateful wife. I convinced myself that his controlling nature was just a byproduct of his deep love for me. It wasn't until our late 30s that the fog began to lift. I started seeing the microaggressions, the gaslighting, the way he subtly demeaned me in front of his colleagues. When I finally found the courage to suggest a separation, I thought we would just quietly untangle our lives. I severely underestimated the ego of the man I had married. Now, sitting in my miserable Tacoma apartment in January, watching the rain lash against the single-pane window, I realized the truth. Delani hadn't saved me in 2011 out of love. He had saved me because a vulnerable, broken, indebted woman is the easiest kind to control. I had resigned myself to a life of quiet disgrace. I had deleted all my social media. I had changed my phone number. I was preparing to move to a different state, to start over where no one knew the name Caitlyn Scott. Then came the knock on my door. It was a heavy, rhythmic knock. 3 sharp raps. I froze on the frayed plaid sofa. Nobody knew where I lived except my lawyer. I crept to the door and peered through the scratched peephole. The hallway was dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb, but the face staring back at my door was unmistakable. It was Thurman Scott, Delani's younger brother. I hadn't seen Thurman in almost 14 years. The last time I saw him was at my wedding in 2012. Shortly after that, Thurman had completely vanished from our lives. Delani always told me that Thurman had fallen in with a bad crowd, got involved in heavy drugs, and moved to Mexico. He's a lost cause, Caitlyn, Delani had said with a dramatic sigh. I've tried everything to help him, but he's toxic. We have to cut ties for our own peace. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open a few inches, leaving the chain attached. Thurman looked nothing like the troubled addict Delani had described. He was 40 now, his dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. He wore a heavy wool peacoat over a crisp button-down shirt. His eyes, the same piercing blue as Delani's, looked tired, haunted, but entirely lucid. "Hello, Caitlyn," he said softly. His voice was gravelly, lacking the slick polish of his brother's. "What do you want, Thurman?" I snapped, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Did Delani send you to see how pathetic my life is now? Tell him I'm suitably ruined. You can go." Thurman didn't flinch. He slowly reached into his coat pocket. I tensed, half expecting a weapon, but he pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal and a manila envelope. "Delani didn't send me," Thurman said, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting my eyes again. "Delani doesn't even know I'm back in the States. I came because I saw what he's doing to you online. A mutual friend sent me screenshots of his little Facebook manifesto. And you came to gloat?" "I came to apologize," Thurman said, his voice cracking slightly. "And I came to give you the ammunition you need to destroy him." My grip on the doorframe tightened. "What are you talking about? Can I come in, Caitlyn? Please. It's freezing out here, and what I have to tell you is going to take a while." I hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed at me to slam the door. This was a Scott man. They were liars by genetics, but the sheer desperation in Thurman's eyes gave me pause. I unhooked the chain and swung the door open, stepping back to let him into the cramped, musty room. Thurman walked in, taking in the state of my apartment. The leaky radiator, the single mattress on the floor, the stack of unpaid legal bills on the tiny kitchenette counter. He swallowed hard, a look of profound guilt crossing his face. He sat down at the small Formica dining table and placed the journal and the envelope between us. I remained standing, crossing my arms over my chest. "Talk." Thurman took a deep breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "You know Delani told everyone I got strung out on heroin and moved to Mexico, right? He said you were toxic. That you stole from him." Thurman let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Of course he did. Typical Delani. The truth is, Caitlyn, I moved to Chicago. I've been living in Chicago for 14 years, working as a high school history teacher. I never touched a needle in my life. Delani forced me out of town." "Forced you? How?" "Because I knew what he did," Thurman said, looking dead at me. "I knew what he did to your father's store. I knew what he did in November 2011. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The floor beneath my feet seemed to pitch violently, like the deck of a ship caught in a storm. My father's store?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "It was an electrical fire." "It wasn't an electrical fire, Caitlyn," Thurman said softly, his eyes brimming with tears. "Delani burned it down." I collapsed into the chair opposite him, my knees suddenly unable to support my weight. No, no, that's impossible. The fire marshal. The fire marshal owed Delani a massive favor. His name was Gregson, right? Delani had helped Gregson out of a quiet DUI a year earlier. Delani was the one who went into the back room of Hayes Hardware that night. He bypassed the security camera. He knew how. He's an architect. He studies security schematics for fun. He poured accelerant into the walls near the breaker box to make it look like an electrical short. "Why?" I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat, raw and agonizing. "Why would he do that? He helped us. He saved me." "He didn't save you, Caitlyn. He hunted you." Thurman pushed the manila envelope toward me. "He was obsessed with you. But you were independent. You had your dad. You had the family business. You didn't need him." "Delani doesn't want partners, Caitlyn. He wants pets. He wants complete and utter dependence. So, he destroyed the things that made you independent. He burned down the store knowing it would ruin your father financially. He didn't plan for your dad to have a heart attack, but when it happened, Delani saw it as the ultimate victory. He stepped in as the grieving savior, and he had you right where he wanted you. Trapped." My hands shook violently as I reached for the envelope. I pulled open the flap and dumped the contents onto the table. There were bank statements from 2011, cash withdrawals from Delani's accounts, totaling thousands of dollars, handed over to a man named Richard Gregson, the fire marshal. There were printed emails between Delani and a shady contractor discussing the exact flammability of the insulation used in commercial buildings built in the 1970s, dated 3 weeks before the fire at Hayes Hardware. And then there was the journal. "What is this?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Delani's a narcissist," Thurman said grimly. "And narcissists love to document their own brilliance. He kept a ledger back then, a diary of his projects. I found it in his study a week before your wedding. I confronted him about it. I threatened to go to the police." "Why didn't you?" I sobbed, tears spilling hot and fast down my cheeks, blurring my vision. "My God, Thurman, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was a coward," Thurman whispered, a tear escaping his own eye. "Delani told me that if I went to the cops, he would frame me for the fire. He had already planted evidence in my apartment accelerant, maps of your store. He told me he'd make sure I spent 20 years in prison. He gave me $10,000 and told me to get on a plane and never come back. And I did. I let him marry you. I let him ruin your life, because I was terrified of him. I've hated myself every single day for 14 years. I opened the leather-bound journal. The handwriting was unmistakably Delani's sharp, precise, architectural lettering. The 12th of November, 2011. "The Hayes project is ready. The old man is over-leveraged. A total loss of inventory will force bankruptcy. Caitlyn will be devastated, but necessary destruction paves the way for a stronger foundation. She needs to realize she cannot survive without me. I will be her rock." A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to put my head between my knees. My father, my sweet, hard-working father who had died believing he was a failure. He hadn't failed. He had been murdered. Slowly, systematically, by the man who had stood at his grave and held my hand. The grief that had sat in my chest for 15 years transformed in a matter of seconds. The sadness evaporated, burned away by a white-hot, blinding rage. "I brought you the proof, Caitlyn," Thurman said, his voice firming up. "I'm ready to testify. I'm ready to go to the police." He thought he could just throw you away like garbage and spin a story to make himself the hero again. But we're going to tear his perfect life to shreds. I lifted my head and looked at Thurman. The terrified, broken woman who had cowered in this apartment for months was gone. In her place was Arthur Hayes' daughter. "We aren't just going to tear his life to shreds," I said, my voice eerily calm as I traced my finger over Delani's handwriting. "We are going to burn it to the ground, and we're going to make sure everyone is watching. Revenge is not a sudden explosion. It is a meticulous construction project." For a week after Thurman walked into my miserable apartment, I barely slept. The leather-bound journal and the stack of financial documents became my new reality. Every time I read Delani's neat, architectural handwriting detailing the destruction of my father's life, a fresh wave of nausea and adrenaline washed over me. I was an accountant by trade. I had spent 15 years balancing Delani's superficial books, managing our household budget, and turning a blind eye to the things he insisted I didn't need to worry about. Now, armed with the bank account numbers Thurman had salvaged from the past, I went to work. We couldn't just walk into the local police precinct. Delani played golf with the chief of police. He sponsored the precinct's annual charity drive. If we handed this evidence over to local authorities, it would conveniently disappear into an evidence locker, and Delani would be tipped off within the hour. We needed an outsider. We needed someone immune to the charm of Delani Scott. Through a contact from my old firm, one of the few people who hadn't blocked my number after Delani's Facebook post, I was referred to a cutthroat attorney named Rachel Hodges in Seattle. Rachel was a former federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime and corruption. We met in a dimly lit booth at a diner halfway between Tacoma and Seattle. When I slid the journal and the bank transfers to Richard Gregson, the corrupt fire marshal, across the sticky table, Rachel's eyes widened. She read the journal entry from the 12th of November, 2011, twice. "Your husband," Rachel said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, "is a textbook sociopath." "I know," I replied, "and I want to ruin him. But I don't just want him to go to jail for arson. The statute of limitations on the property damage might be tricky, even with the murder implication of my father's heart attack. I want to take away the only thing he actually cares about, his reputation, Thurman chimed in from beside me. Exactly, I said. I want to do to him what he did to me, but I want to do it with the truth. And I think I know how to sink him completely. I opened my laptop and showed Rachel what I had been working on for the past week. Using the offshore account numbers from the 2011 fire marshal payoff, I had started digging into Delani's current projects. I knew his passwords. I knew his mother's maiden name, his childhood street, the name of his first pet. He hadn't bothered to change his secondary recovery emails because, in his arrogance, he assumed I was too broken to ever fight back. What I found was staggering. Delani's current masterpiece, the one he had been working on for 3 years, was a massive commercial and residential complex downtown called The Summit. It was a multi-million-dollar urban revitalization project, but the books didn't match. Delani was deeply over-leveraged, just like my father had been. To keep the summit afloat, Delani had been embezzling money from his own firm's escrow accounts and defrauding his primary investors through a web of shell companies. And the most sickening twist of all? I pulled up the property deed for the land where the summit was currently being built. Rachel leaned in, reading the address. Wait, is this? Yes, I choked out, fighting the bile rising in my throat. It's the exact lot where Hayes Hardware used to stand. He bought the foreclosed land through a shell company a year after my father died for pennies on the dollar. He burned down my family's legacy so he could build a monument to himself on our ashes. Rachel sat back, tapping her pen against her chin. A sharp, dangerous smile spread across her face. Okay, the local cops are out. But financial fraud across state lines, wire fraud, and bribing a public official? That's federal. I know a special agent at the FBI field office in Seattle. He's been itching for a high-profile white-collar bust. But we need to serve this up on a silver platter. We need a confession, or at least a public cornering where he can't spin the narrative. He's hosting a massive charity gala in 2 weeks, I said, my voice steadying. It's the grand unveiling of the summit's final architectural models to the investors and the city council. The whole town will be there. The mayor, the press, everyone who commented on that Facebook post and called me a monster. Thurman looked at me, a mixture of awe and fear in his eyes. Caitlyn, if you show up there, he'll have security throw you out before you cross the threshold. He won't, I said coldly, because he won't know I'm there until it's too late. I spent 15 years as his shadow. I know how to be invisible. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calculated espionage. Rachel brought in Special Agent Miller, a no-nonsense veteran, who took one look at the journal and the offshore wire transfers and immediately opened a quiet, covert investigation. He subpoenaed the remaining financial records we couldn't access, confirming the massive embezzlement. Meanwhile, I was preparing for the performance of my life. I used the last of my meager savings to buy a tailored emerald green evening gown. I dyed my hair from its natural blonde to a dark, striking brunette and cut it into a sharp bob. I practiced my posture. For months, I had walked with my shoulders hunched, trying to make myself as small as possible, absorbing the shame Delani had draped over me. No more. I was Arthur Hayes' daughter. I was going to stand tall. Thurman reached out to a contact he had at the catering company hired for the gala. He managed to secure us 2 staff access badges. We didn't need to walk through the front door. We just needed access to the AV room, overlooking the main ballroom. On the night before the gala, I sat in my dingy apartment, staring at the Facebook post that had ruined my life. It was still up. It had over 1,000 likes. I read the comments from Brenda, from my neighbors, from the people I had loved. The pain was still there, a hollow ache in my ribs, but it was overshadowed by a searing, metallic anticipation. Delani had told the world a story about me. Tomorrow night, I was going to tell them a story about him, and I had the receipts. April 22nd, the night of the spring gala. The grand ballroom of the downtown Regency Hotel was an ocean of crystal chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and the soft murmur of the city's elite. From our vantage point in the darkened AV control booth, suspended above the ballroom floor, Thurman and I watched the crowd mingle. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands, resting on the cool metal of the control board, were trembling slightly. I forced myself to take a deep, shaky breath, smelling the ozone of the electronics mixed with the faint scent of Thurman's wool coat. "You okay?" Thurman whispered in the darkness. "I've never been better," I lied. though as I looked down at the man who had destroyed my life, my fear began to curdle into pure, unadulterated resolve. Delani was in his element. He stood near the center of the room, wearing a bespoke tuxedo, his silver fox hair perfectly styled. He held a glass of bourbon in one hand, gesturing broadly with the other, as he entertained a circle of wealthy investors and city officials. I spotted Brenda in a glittering silver dress, laughing at something he said, placing a sympathetic hand on his arm. It made my stomach turn. At 8:30 p.m., the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as a single spotlight illuminated the main stage. Delani walked up the steps, radiating an aura of humble brilliance. The applause was deafening. I plugged the encrypted flash drive Rachel had prepared into the AV system, bypassing the hotel's standard presentation deck. I had my finger hovering over the switch that would cut Delani's feed and replace it with mine. Thank you. Thank you all so much, Delani began, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. It was that smooth, velvety tone he used to manipulate everyone around him. We are here tonight to celebrate the future of our beautiful city. The summit is not just a building. It is a promise of renewal. He paused, lowering his head, letting a mask of profound, practiced sadness wash over his features. The crowd leaned in. Many of you know that this has been a profoundly difficult year for me personally, Delani continued, his voice cracking with artificial emotion. My marriage ended in a tragedy of betrayal. I tried so hard to save my wife from her own demons. But sometimes, you have to let go to protect your own peace. A collective murmur of sympathy rippled through the audience. I felt a surge of hot disgust. But from the ashes of that heartbreak, I poured my soul into this project, he said, gesturing toward the massive screen behind him. And tonight, I want to show you the heart of the summit. He clicked his remote to bring up the first architectural rendering. I slammed my finger down on the switch. The screen behind Delani didn't show a gleaming glass tower. Instead, a massive, high-definition image of a battered leather journal filled the screen. The handwriting was 50 feet tall, impossible to miss. The 12th of November, 2011. The Hayes project is ready. The old man is over-leveraged. A total loss of inventory will force bankruptcy. Caitlyn will be devastated, but necessary destruction paves the way for a stronger foundation. The ballroom went dead silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Delani turned around, his smile freezing, then melting into a mask of total confusion. He clicked his remote frantically. I advanced the slide. Now, the screen displayed a bank statement. A wire transfer of $15,000 from Delani's private account to Richard Gregson, the fire marshal, dated 1 week after Hayes Hardware burned to the ground. Next to it, an email from Delani to the corrupt contractor. Make sure the accelerant traces look like an electrical fault in the 1970s wiring. What is this? Someone shouted from the front row. It was the mayor. Delani was pale, his hands shaking. There's been a security breach. Cut the feed. Someone cut the feed, he screamed, his polished demeanor shattering completely. I advanced the slide one more time. This one wasn't about the past. It was about the present. It was a forensic accounting flowchart Rachel had designed, clearly showing millions of dollars being siphoned from the summit's investor pool into Delani's offshore shell companies. The silence broke into a chaotic roar. Investors started shouting. Brenda stood frozen, her hands over her mouth. I picked up the AV microphone. Good evening, Delani, I said. My voice boomed through the ballroom, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. It sounded strong. It sounded nothing like the broken woman he had left in the dirt. Delani spun toward the booth, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in him before. Caitlyn! I walked out of the booth and stood on the small balcony overlooking the floor, the spotlight catching my emerald dress. Thurman stepped out beside me. The sight of his dead-to-the-world brother standing next to his supposedly insane ex-wife was the final blow. Delani staggered back as if he had been physically struck. You told everyone I destroyed our marriage, Delani, I said into the mic, looking down at the sea of upturned, shocked faces. You told them I was a liar. You told them I drained our accounts. But you forgot the cardinal rule of accounting. Every transaction leaves a paper trail, even the ones you make in the dark. She's lying! Delani screamed, his voice pitching into a hysterical shriek, pointing a trembling finger at me. She hacked the system. She's mentally ill. And that, That's an imposter. My brother is a junkie. I've been sober for 14 years, Delani, Thurman said, his unmiked voice carrying surprisingly well in the shocked silence. And I've kept your journal every single day since I left. Before Delani could scream another lie, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Special Agent Miller walked in, flanked by 4 federal agents in tactical windbreakers. They didn't blend in with the tuxedo crowd. They parted the sea of socialites like a knife. Delani Scott, Agent Miller announced, flashing his badge. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and the bribery of a public official. We also have a warrant to reopen the 2011 arson investigation of Hayes Hardware. Delani tried to run. The charismatic, powerful architect who had held the whole town in the palm of his hand literally tried to scramble off the side of the stage like a cornered rat. 2 agents grabbed him, forcing his arms behind his back, the metallic click of the handcuffs echoing loudly over the murmuring crowd. As they marched him down the center aisle, Delani locked eyes with me on the balcony. There was no remorse, only a venomous, pathetic hatred of a man who realized his mirror had finally shattered. You're nothing without me, he spat as they dragged him past the mayor. You're nothing. I didn't say a word. I just watched him go. The aftermath was a media circus. The Facebook post that had been my digital tombstone was deleted by the police for evidence, replaced by front-page headlines of Delani's massive fraud scheme. The investors sued him into oblivion. The local cops, realizing the FBI was breathing down their necks, turned on him to save themselves. Richard Gregson cut a plea deal and confessed to taking the bribe to falsify the fire report. Delani Scott was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The people who had abandoned me tried to come back. Brenda showed up at my new apartment with flowers and tears, begging for forgiveness, claiming she was manipulated. I took the flowers, thanked her, and closed the door in her face. You don't get to participate in a witch hunt and then apologize to the ashes. Thurman moved back to the West Coast. We don't see each other often. We are a reminder of each other's darkest chapters, but on the anniversary of my father's death, we meet at the cemetery. We bring coffee, and we sit in the quiet. I used the restitution money from the fraud case to buy back a small commercial lot on the edge of town. It's not a hardware store anymore. It's a small financial consulting firm, owned and operated by a woman who knows exactly how to find the things people try to hide. I lost 15 years of my life to a monster who wore a savior's mask. But he made one critical mistake. He burned down my life to make me weak, never realizing that fire doesn't just destroy, it forges iron. If you've ever been the victim of a narcissist's smear campaign, let this story be your proof that the truth always leaves a paper trail. Like this video to support the fight against toxic manipulation. Leave a comment with your own experiences, and please hit that subscribe button for more true stories of survival, justice, and reclaiming your power.